When I talked to Tim Ferriss, I remember I was at Noah Kagan's house up on the roof, and right next to Tim Ferriss was this guy, Charlie Hone. Charlie Hone went on to become a mega success on his own. Great author, great human being. How many people didn't even think to go and talk to the person who was hanging out next to Tim Ferriss?
This Audience Summit is brought to you in partnership with Podcast Notes, the best ideas from the world's best podcasts in minutes. Andrew, welcome to the Grow Your Podcast Audience Summit, brought to you by the Lewis and Kyle Show. We're very excited to have you on as a participant. So thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. I think I was thinking about it just a couple minutes before this, and I think you definitely hold the mantle for the longest running participant in the summit as far as whose show's been around the longest, and probably by a good record. So that's pretty cool. Could you real quick tell us a little bit about yourself, your show, the when and why you started it, and what the overall mission and purpose is?
Yeah. I had a greeting card company when I started in business. And I remember when I was struggling, I went and I got a coach. And the coach came because, well, I'm going to say exactly what it is. I went to a Tony Robbins event. Tony Robbins lit everyone on fire. He said, if you need a coach, you can get a coach. I got a coach from Tony Robbins people. And the woman didn't understand a thing about business. She just didn't get it. What she did was she went through his program and she said, I know his program. I've mastered it. I've gotten whatever certificate I'm supposed to get. And then I jumped out of an airplane with Tony Robbins. I'm prepared to tell you how to run your business. Dude, I was doing, I think at the time, maybe $20 million a year in sales. And wow. The problems I was having were pretty specific to my business, to my approach. And she didn't get any part of it. She had zero experience in business. She had lots of experience in going through Tony Robbins' coaching program. And I remember thinking, as I was spilling my guts to her, talking to her about the challenges I had working with the people on my team, trying to figure out how we should be structuring the sales department, all the stuff that every tech entrepreneur is listening to me, any entrepreneur is listening to me, understands and relates to, I realized she doesn't get it. She's unable to help. It's not that she's a bad person. She's just ill-equipped. She doesn't have the experience. She doesn't have the knowledge. She doesn't have she doesn't have it. And I remember saying to myself, there are a lot of coaches who've never done anything. The people who do things, they're like me. We're busy working. We have no time to tell the world, this is how we did it. This is how you could do it too. This is what's working, what's not. And I said, at some point, I'm going to have enough money. I'm going to fund somebody to do this. I'll just do what my hero, Andrew Carnegie, did. And I'll take some money or take some service or something, and I'll help someone go and do this and go interview the most successful people and bring out what's worked for them. Anyway, I sold the company. I took time off. I was on the beach in LA. I was going out at night in LA. And I said, a little at a time, I said, I think I could do this myself. And I started doing interviews, and 2,000 interviews later, Mixergy has now become this place where entrepreneurs who heard me in the early days, who built their businesses while they were listening to me interview entrepreneurs about how they built their successful companies, are now cranking out successful companies themselves and talking about it and coming back and letting me interview them. And that's what Mixergy is. A place where real entrepreneurs talk about how they really did it to an audience of other entrepreneurs who are really building their companies right now.
Well, thank you for sharing that story with us. That 2,000 milestone is an incredible marker, and that's amazing. And Kyle and I really have kind of come to a similar conclusion with our podcast that some of the greatest professors and the greatest teachers and the greatest mentors, really, you have to have been the practitioner first. It just makes the world of the difference. So makes a whole lot of sense. But our first question for you for the summit is, what has been the most effective marketing channel for growing the audience for your podcast, and how have you used it?
I hate to say that I used it, but the most effective marketing channel is my guests. I interview entrepreneurs who have audiences of their own. And when they say I was on Mixergy with pride, they then bring in their audience and have their audience come and listen. And that's huge for me. So for example, I interviewed the founder of Penji recently. Penji is a service that will do your design work for you. The entrepreneur behind it, Jonathan, said, I hate how when I sign up a new customer for a design project, I lose them after they're done. What if there was ongoing work we could do for them? And he created the subscription design work. Well, he was listening. He's proud that as a listener, he got to be on and talk about how he built his company. And then he went and he tweeted it out. And he didn't just tweet out, hey, I was on Mixergy. It was, I've been listening for years. I couldn't wait for the day. Here I am. And that happens over and over and over again.
Yeah. And that's got to be incredibly validating for you and for the mission of your show when somebody goes out and does something like that. You know, I was just listening to your HustleCon talk, And I know that a lot of people that have signed up for trends, that community, have really indoctrinated themselves and then gone out and started like multi-million dollar and even $1 billion business because of the energy from those different communities. So that's great. The second question for you and for everybody that's participating in our audience summit is, what are some underrated tactics that you've used to attract listeners to your show?
Here's an underrated tactic that I hated. I would hate to think of as a tactic. I moved to Washington, D.C., finally coming back to the U.S. from Argentina, where I lived for a year. And people would say, hey, Andrew, I happen to be in Washington, D.C. Who knew that there'd be any entrepreneurs who just pass through Washington, D.C.? It feels like the type of place you go to when you're trying to lobby Congress. Anyway, these entrepreneurs would make their way in. There'd be some conference, there'd be something, there'd be some family member. And so we'd go out to drinks. And I think that just my makeup is, I always like to buy everyone drinks. I try to think about what is it about me? Why can't I just let somebody else buy the drinks? Anyway, something I'm working on. But we'd have this great night. I would buy people drinks. I'd have a great conversation with them. And I'd feel like, why? How is this really a business thing? Why am I wasting my time with this? Just because I'm enjoying it doesn't mean that I should be doing it. I could reach a broad audience of thousands of people online. Instead, I'm sitting down with 5 people. And what I inevitably find is there more benefits than you could ever directly trace back to the event. Sometimes, no doubt, I would go back and I would see that they would sign up to my premium membership and basically spend hundreds of dollars with me after I bought them drinks for just dozens of dollars, right? And I just felt so uncomfortable about that. But I was proud that they would do it, but I felt uncomfortable. This like we just became friends, and now you're buying from. Anyway, another one of my issues. But then another thing would happen. They would tell me about their problems. They would tell me how they were really afraid to quit their jobs. They would tell me how they were feeling not inspired by the entrepreneurs I was interviewing, but sometimes they would feel insecure because they weren't as good as the founders of Airbnb. They didn't have what Paul Graham, who was interviewed on Mixergy, had. They didn't have all those. And I didn't realize that. And I didn't realize the problems that they had that they wouldn't reveal unless we were just having a drink, talking person to person in a real like setting. And so I hesitate to say that it's an underrated marketing technique, but it really is. It helps, yes, get more customers, but it also helps me make the product, which for me is Mixergy interviews and courses, more attuned with the real needs that people have that they wouldn't talk about publicly.
And I think making friends in the real world is definitely never a bad call, and it helps you more deeply understand your listeners and make your show better suited for them. So I think that totally works.
I have to say that I became super intentional about it, where I don't want to become one of these people who's doing nothing but hanging out. It's so easy to go from I'm getting to know people and it's helping me as a person, or I'm getting to know people and it's good for my business, to I'm just hanging out and having drinks. It's too easy to go into just hanging out and having drinks. And I don't want to have that kind of life. I don't want to look back 20 years from now and say, I hung out, I had a good time. I want to have a meaningful time and enjoy that. So I can go for hours with you about the process of doing this right. But I'll say that it's not just hanging out randomly. It's pretty thought out.
Absolutely. And I think that producing a podcast is one of the best ways to turn hanging out, quote unquote, into an actual asset that benefits you for times to come. Third question for you.
Yes.
Thank you. Third question for you. And I know you had brought this up a little bit when you shared the anecdote about your recent guest and how he said, I've been listening for years and been waiting for my shot to come on the show. But how do you think you've converted the listeners of your show into fans? And how have you kept the same people coming back?
I don't know that I've kept the same people coming back. I think that in the past, I thought that the only benefit of a podcast the subscription mechanism in podcasting is that you get people to subscribe. And so you keep staying with them. And I thought about my own listening habits. I listened to Howard Stern growing up for years and years and years. It was just there. I listened to Rush Limbaugh long after I gave up on politics in any way, just because it was part of my habit to have it on. And I thought, this is what podcasting is going to become, this habit, and I'll grow old with these people. What I found is that with podcasting, that often does happen, much more so than it does on other platforms like Instagram or TikTok, where people are much more in and out. But people do leave, they do disconnect, and then they do return, and that's fine. That they disconnect. Sometimes they feel that they just want to move on to a different part of their lives. They want to put business behind and then start something different. And then they're ready to come back. And I've learned that that's okay. And frankly, my habits are like that too. I listened to this one tech podcast for years and then I gave up on it. And lately, because I'm the kind of person who likes to always listen to something, I hate silence unless I'm in a meditation retreat. I'll go to sleep listening to a podcast. And I've been listening to this podcast now, just going to sleep. And there's something very calming and engaging, but not ultra engaging, that helps me. All this to say is it's totally fine to have people be obsessed, disconnect for a little bit, and then come back on their own terms. And that's just fine.
That's a really interesting answer, and definitely the first framing of that question that we've gotten like that so far. I think it's true too, and it's good for both the audience and for you for that cycle to be true. You know, you wouldn't be getting new listeners if other people weren't leaving other podcasts and coming to you, and everyone's learning more and becoming better because of it. But
the trick though is to be consistent, to be there. I was reading Ryan Holiday, a long time supporter. I read his book Perennial Seller, where he talks about the importance of creating work that lasts. And I do think about my interviews as opposed to all these tech podcasts who are just so engaged with the news. Here's the latest iPhone that came out. Nobody cares about it when the next iPhone comes out. They may not even care about it 2 months later when they've decided whether to buy an iPhone or not. I want Mixergy interviews to last. And I've gone back over this year to interviews I did a year ago, 10 years ago, and they still hold up. They're still just as meaningful. And so that's important to me, but it's also important that I last, that I continue. And I work really hard to create a process that allows me to continue doing this year after year. So when someone says, I hate entrepreneurship because something went on in their life this year, and they're ready to come back to it next year, I want to be there. I don't want them to say, I wish Andrew was there, or that was good when it lasted. I want them to say, Andrew's back in my life. I'm ready.
Yeah, I think I was going to say, I think that's especially true. I was also doing some research, and I see that you've, had Tim Ferriss on 4 or 5 different times. And I wanted to see what was the first interview you had with him, because it's so cool to, see someone like him who's a mega celebrity now, but I can go back and listen to your interview from him from 2008 when he first published the 4-Hour Workweek. And your questions are, how did you get attention for this book? And like, that was an interesting conversation to go back and listen to in 2020.
How amazing is that? Yeah.
It's history.
Think about how that, I'm sorry to interrupt you. There's so many things that are amazing about that. Number one, his answer still holds up. Everyone wants to talk to the celebrity. No one wants to talk to the person who's near him. When I talked to Tim Ferriss, I remember I was at Noah Kagan's house up on the roof, and right next to Tim Ferriss was this guy, Charlie Hone. Charlie Hone went on to become a mega success on his own. Great author, great human being. How many people didn't even think to go and talk to the person who was hanging out next to Tim Ferriss? And meanwhile, Charlie was probably the guy making the decisions for him, saying, you should be doing Mixergy Interview. You should be partnering up with this and that. Anyway, so that's something that holds up. The other thing that holds up for me about him, shoot, I'm running late for my sister's birthday. This is just
two more quick questions. Just
okay. I'll say this. The other thing that holds
do
up
rapid fire.
You can hear him packing up because he wasn't prepared to officially be on a podcast. I don't even know if he knew what a podcast was. But even while he's packing, mind somewhere else, he is totally engaged and systemized in all of his answers. And I love that you can go back and see the systemized person that was there before everything else was there. Yeah, so go on. What are the other two?
Tim's incredible. Fourth question for you. If you could start your show over again, what would you do differently now to grow it more effectively with what you've learned?
To use what I'm learning instantly, to say this is not for me to become smarter, for the audience to become smarter, but to get actual actionable techniques that I'm going to use right now. I think that in the past, it made a lot of sense to do interviews with entrepreneurs. When I started, there was nobody talking to the founders of Airbnb. There was just like some article somewhere. Here, they came on Mixergy and people can see them, hear them, and get an experience of them. And that's why Mixergy made sense back then. I think today, people who copy Mixergy forget that these people have access to their audience directly. You could go on Twitter and talk to Brian. Brian Chesky. You can go on all these other platforms and connect with them. What's important today is not somebody to finally say, I can introduce you to these characters, to these personalities, to these entrepreneurs, but somebody could say, watch me as I do what I'm learning from them. And that's how we'll both learn together.
Well, that's very reassuring, because we've built our podcast as we're not the experts yet, but we're 20 years old using what we learn and applying it as the guinea pigs along the way.
And you're actually showing it. You're saying, I learned this from Andrew. Here's how I'm using what I learned.
Absolutely. And that's, again, we've created the summit for the same reason. because we want to learn how to grow our show. And so we're going to take the best ideas from this conversation with you and start working them into what we're doing. But last question, real quick for you. Hypothetical thought experiments. If courtesy of the Lewis and Kyle show gave you a free gift of $1,000 to have a creative marketing campaign to get some attention for your show, what would you do with the money?
$30,000 marketing campaign?
1,000.
Oh, $1,000 marketing campaign.
Yes.
For something like that, I would go a little bit, I would copy my friend Noah Kagan, who bought an ad with me, who said, if you subscribe to the Noah Kagan show, I will give you $1. Just subscribe and then email me and I'll PayPal you the $1. I thought that was brilliant because it's shocking. I thought it was wonderful too, because now he had a direct connection with people who subscribe. So he could ask them, why did you subscribe? What are you hoping to get out of it? And he's recently done that again, I think for his YouTube channel. So more direct to the customer, more direct to the audience. All right, man. Thanks.
Thanks so much. We'll leave a link to Mixergy in the description.
Yeah, do it. Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for watching this interview. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please subscribe to our channel right here on YouTube. And if you feel like you learned something, share this episode on social media to help us grow our audience as well.